Hey everyone, Happy New Year, and we want to say Happy New Year and welcome to the very first Radiotopia Presents of 2024. It's a series that we are truly excited about. It's called Shocking, Heartbreaking, Transformative. Now, this is from documentarian Jess Shane, who put out an open call on Craigslist and then worked with 4 strangers to explore the standard rules that documentarians and journalists use to tell their subject stories. So the series gets into all sorts of questions about what happens when people's real lives are collected, edited, and consumed. The show pulls back the curtain on what goes on behind the scenes of your favorite nonfiction shows. And then it turns in on itself and some really interesting twists and turns along the way in the making of the show. I've gotten to know Jess a little bit over the making of this show. Every time I chat with her, there's a new wrinkle to this story. It is really incredible. So go check out the new Radiotopia Presents series, Shocking, Heartbreaking, Transformative. It is out now on your favorite podcast platform. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, April 28th, 1942, the U.S. government asks cities along the East Coast to dim their lights in order to be less visible to enemy submarines that were thought to be just off the coast. The dim outs of 1942 were, of course, just one of many collective wartime efforts. Here to talk about that, what they may have to say about today's collective efforts is, as always, Nicole of Columbia. Hello, Nikki.
Hi, Jody.
Where do you want to start? You want to start big think? Like, what does it all mean to band together? Or do you want to start with some of the small details about what happened in the dim out of 1942? I'll let you choose, but we're definitely going to touch on both.
Well, I want to do the little details because it's the little details of this story that are so fascinating, because I think we've largely forgotten that the places on the coast did this during the war. Because when we think about the U.S. coming under attack during World War II, it's Pearl Harbor, but then the rest of the country seems kind of safe for the rest of this war that's happening in Europe and the Pacific. But there were German submarines lurking right off the coast. And because of cities having their lights on, any merchant ship passing near 15, 30 miles from the coast were all of a sudden thrown up into silhouette, and German subs could see what direction they were heading and how fast they were going, and then could attack them. And so this dim out order was the army, which had just kind of taken control of the East Coast, saying, y'all got to turn out your lights, particularly on the coastline, in order to save the people and the goods aboard these ships.
Yeah. And I think the regulation was initially, it was 15 miles inland and then buildings of a certain height just because of the angle of the light, I suppose. But then it does seem like some places did go into complete blackout, and at the very least, when you read descriptions here, you get this sort of eerie sense of all of a sudden these bustling cities just quieting and dimming out.
Right, because it was those places that were most vibrant that were having to turn out their lights. So think about a place like Coney Island, which was this sort of glittering jewel in the night with all of the rides lit up. And because they were right on the coast, they just had to go dark. Times Square goes dark. Like the Planters Peanut neon sign has to be shut off. And there is kind of that feeling of things winding down and going dark that lets people know that something really serious is happening.
Yeah. Some of the writing about this that we found that our researcher Jacob helped uncover is really kind of beautiful in describing the slowdown, and it makes you think that obviously you can evoke that by reading about it. You can talk to people who lived through it, and that image is surely locked in their minds. I will say that a couple weeks ago, I actually got in my car and I drove to Times Square on a Saturday afternoon because I wanted to lock in an image of what is Times Square like when it's completely empty. And I drove through the heart of Times Square completely alone on a Saturday evening. And I mean, I will never forget that image. I locked it in and then I quickly went home and I washed my hands and I got inside and I sheltered in place. But I think we're going to live with some of these images for the rest of our lives.
Well, I think because it goes right to the heart of what makes New York special. It has that image as the city that never sleeps. And these moments are ones in which it goes into hibernation. And that sort of shift is so remarkable and it's so visceral.
We're talking about sort of serene images in these moments of slowdown, but they are, of course, the result of crisis, and they're the result of government imposition. And so let's talk a little bit about those two things. So first off, I mean, you did mention how the threats during World War II and the U.S. being under attack was, when we think of that, we think of Pearl Harbor. We also, when we think of like wartime sacrifices during World War II, this doesn't really come to mind. At least for me, I knew about like war bonds, and I knew about manufacturing efforts, and I knew about obviously people enlisting, but the notion that then the government was also asking people to dim the lights. To me, what it says, and I think we're starting to experience it now, is that it is a ongoing period of sacrifice, and there are little sacrifices in front of you at any given moment, but it is also this larger thing that comes down to very specific acts. I actually don't know whether I'm comforted or sort of unsettled by this, but it's a reminder that like it's not just staying home, and it's not just wear a mask. It's going to be the next thing and the next thing and the next thing.
We talk about the home front during World War II and all of the sacrifices Americans were making, but they were making them little by little, right? Giving up a little butter here, giving up a little gasoline here, turning off the lights here. Stepping back, you see the level of that sacrifice. And there was, at the time, some resistance to those levels of sacrifice. We should say that they tried to do the dim out voluntarily, and people just weren't doing it well enough. That's why the Army had to come in and order that it happen.
But what's the lesson there? Is it that unless there's like an incredibly strict and basically mandated effort, it's always going to eventually erode? Because what, people are not actually as good. I don't want to draw too much of a lesson here. People are not actually as good as we hope or whatever.
Well, just that trying to get millions of people to get on the same page, to do something, to make a sacrifice that may not be against something that's seen as an immediate threat. I think that's the big thing, is you're being asked to turn out your lights in order to dim the lights of the city in the hopes that that might save some ship out there in the waters that might somehow help in the war effort and therefore save your country. And those are a lot of steps removed.
You know, the sort of 2-week lag that's built into the coronavirus is the most insidious part of it all, because it removes that threat. It just delays, action and result in both directions, bad action and bad result, and good action and good result. And it's just what's making this so difficult all around. Does it make you think about what kinds of messaging breaks through? Like I in thinking about this moment, I have felt like there's been some stuff that has really broken through for folks. Like flatten the curve, I thought was a really effective line to just get people to visualize actually a pretty complex idea. There's been other things where I think the messaging hasn't been as good, and it's been harder to get people's head around it. Some of the stuff around asymptomatic carriers has been less sticky for people to get their head around. And if we'd gotten our head around that a couple weeks earlier, it may have gone through. So does any of this make you think about what sticks with people, what doesn't?
You're right about the sloganeering. We see back in World War I and World War II the use of what were honestly propaganda posters in order to get people to act in certain ways, right? Slogans like loose lips sink ships as a way of getting people to not spread gossip about what might be happening on the shore or within the military. And also seeing people in authority say something actually helps a lot, the Army in this case. But remember that Dr. Fauci now has really high approval and really high trust ratings. And so having somebody who seems like a nonpartisan authority figure, it might say something troubling about what society responds to, but it is something that people have been responding to and did respond to at the time. I think also this is where collective action matters. I think that we'll see and have already started to see more people wearing masks because more people are wearing masks, right? It builds on itself. Yeah. Once things start to become normalized, people are much more comfortable doing it.
Frankly, I was waiting for someone to tell me to wear a mask just because, put aside the epidemiology, at just some level, I just wanted something active to do. Though you also then see the reframing of stay at home as a proactive step. And I just feel like the more we can frame stuff as you are doing something proactive, you're doing something good. It's not that we're taking away your agency, but we're actually giving you a chance to save lives, help your neighbors, et cetera, et cetera. I feel like that's where it gets powerful and effective.
Right. Proactive and signs of solidarity. And that can be incredibly empowering and make you feel like you're not alone.
So that said, we look to moments in history, and this is not 1942 and it's not now, but it is a moment when in 1918 and 1919 where there were protests against wearing masks, and we might be seeing that same sort of thing again. And so I think it's just inevitable that there will be pushback against any sort of regulations, and also inevitable, and I suppose understandable, that there was just going to be fatigue that sets in around this.
I think that, if anything, one of the gifts of this moment is that it gives us a real empathy for people who lived through those times. Because I do think we tend to come away from reading about like World War II and have this very rote vision of everyone banding together and winning the war. And you start to understand the banality and boredom of doing your best to help out, when doing your best means things like putting on a mask, staying home, or turning out the lights.
Yeah, I mean, people who were rallying during World War II were also bored and poor and worried and nervous and going about their lives. I think you have to remember that for sure. And I'll end by saying that I do find it important, but also I will say comforting, to look back and say, well, there was a time when Times Square was dark before. And that's not to paper over the difficulty of that time or the difficulty of this time, but just, at some level, I do find comfort in just knowing that. And, we leave it there and we'll see. But it was nice for me to rediscover this moment of the dim outs and do some thinking around it. All right, that's the end of the episode. Nikki, thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Jody.
This Day in Esoteric Political History is a proud member of Radiotopia from PRX. You can find out lots more about the show, including how to suggest topics. Keep them coming. They're fantastic at thisdaypod.com. Our researcher and producer is Jacob Feldman. Thursday, we're jumping back to more recent history to 5 years ago when a relatively unknown Democratic Socialist senator announced his candidacy for President of the United States. Okay, I'll give it away. It's Bernie Sanders. That's next time. My name is Jody Avirgan. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Radiotopia.